should be live. This is Speed in his tiny little helix. And I say tiny because it feels like the world is coming closer. Today we're going to have the clinician that lives the closest to me. It's probably just 6 miles away, right?
Yeah, about that.
So a narrow gauge modeler, author with work featured in every issue of the HON3 annual. He is the LSR, that's the Lone Star Region's AP chairman. And he and his father, recently retired National AP chairman, Mr. Paul Richardson, became the first father-son MMRs. He's been teaching clinics in the region forever and nationally for almost ever. A big welcome to Mr. Duane Richardson.
Well, thank you, Speed. We got a lot to cover tonight, so I'm going to jump right in here and get the PowerPoint kicked off. And we're going to start off talking tonight about what it takes to make a model great. And this is going to be a lot of kind of tongue-in-cheek. We're going to have a good time here, talk about a few tips and tricks and things. My woefully out-of-date website is at the bottom of each slide here, so you got plenty of time to write it down since it's really long. There is some email contacts out there if you like to get a hold of me to ask any questions or anything later. The Contact Us link on the webpage there will reach out to both my dad and I, and one of us will get back to you for sure. But at any rate, let's jump right in. So what does it take to make a model great? Don't mess it up. That was easy. Class dismissed. Obviously, it goes deeper and deeper into this, but it's one of these things that with a little planning, a little better execution, everything to come up blemish free is the idea. So we're going to break this down into a few categories tonight. So the first section is what I like to call plumb crazy or on the straight and narrow. Yes, I watched a lot of Rocky and Bullwinkle, so there's a lot of bad puns around, and I enjoy every one of them. There are a lot of things that people do, though, when they're working on a structure, for example, where it will rock back and forth on your tabletop. And the simple part of that is it's not square. The building is not perfectly plumb in all directions, and you can push on either corner and it will teeter-totter back and forth. And there's some things you can do to correct it. There's a lot of tools and jigs that you can buy. Micromark sells a really nice metal assembly tray that has these magnets that you can put up against it, and it will hold the walls up in a 90 or a T shape. If you do get one of these, the corners are open, and that's for a reason. Please don't bend the walls up to try to close the corners up, because A, it will take it out of a 90, and B, it'll keep you from being able to put a T intersection wall together. These are really handy little tools. I have a pair of them, as a matter of fact, and I've used them for years. However, I have switched over to the corner clamps that Kaufman Graphics makes. These are really, really nice. They come in all different sorts of sizes and scales. Everything's small enough to do something in N or Z scale, all the way up to handle even your largest stuff. So these are really, really nice. But the thing is, and where either of these tools come in very handy, is that it will hold your walls in a true 90. What it won't do for you, however, is make sure that the bottom is at a true 90. A lot of us will work on a self-healing mat. Part of the assembly that I do, I actually have a piece of window glass out of a car, and it's perfectly flat. It's a rear window out of a Volkswagen, and I built models on it for years and years. Now, it's not good for cutting parts apart because that glass will obviously dull a blade out fairly quickly. I still do a lot of that kind of work on the self-healing mat. But for assembly, a piece of glass is a good, straight, solid piece of glass is a great way to get your bottoms of the walls lined up, and then let the clamp itself handle the other piece of it. A cheap source that you may have laying around the house, if you have kids still at home, or if you have grandkids, you've probably walked in the middle of the night and stepped on a Lego. Legos are perfectly square, and the Duplos as well. And you can take two walls and glue them together and clothespin them, or not safety pin them, but you can clothespin them or clamp them to the bottoms of these Legos, and it will create a perfect 90-degree joint. Wood, I do a lot of work in wood, so you're going to see me mention some of this stuff more than I do styrenes or whatever. With styrenes, you can use your MEKs or your acetone-based glues, and they set up very quickly. But you're going to lose that fast assembly time. You're going to lose the rest of that time trying to make your plastic look like wood. And I've found in doing clinics with a friend of mine that over the course of the project, I can go just as fast working in wood as he can in styrene, because by the time he gets his styrene to look like wood, I've already started the assembly, and then once he gets everything done, he catches up with me, and then it's kind of a push through the rest of the process. But In woods, I like to use Aleene's tacky glue. It's a nice flexible joint. It will allow you a little bit of give. If you do get one a little out of square, you need to pull it straight. But if you do get your building where it is a little rocky around, one of the first things we tend to want to do out of instinct is try to sand it flat. And unfortunately, what we'll end up doing a lot of times is we'll hold the building down on a piece of sandpaper and we'll push the building left and right or forward and backwards or whatever. And what will happen is you'll get more pressure on one side of your hand than the other, and you'll end up actually sanding a bit of a bevel into it. If you'll take that piece of sandpaper and have it down on that piece of glass I was talking about earlier and move the building in a circular motion, it will actually prevent you from sanding that bevel into it, and it will sand it down pretty flat. The other option is to glue it down and weight it down and force it to go flat, but that does put some stresses into the model that can cause a failure over time. Now, blobs and gaps. Now, the Blob was a nice cheesy horror movie back in the 50s, but it is also, like it says here, the enemy of all good models. Glue marks are the easiest thing to correct when you're working on a model. You'll get a little bit of squeeze out, or you'll touch it onto the wall, not where you wanted it to be, and you'll move it over. You need to clean that glue up. It is something that really sticks out. And one of the things that we usually try to do is we'll reach up there and we'll wipe it off with our finger. If it's a painted surface, that's fine. If you're going to be using stains later and it's a raw wood, do not wipe it off with your finger, because what's going to happen is you're going to force the glue down into the wood fibers and seal it, and then it won't take the stain the same way that the raw wood will. Let it dry, and then you can cut it off with a sharp knife. I like to use either a really new X-Acto or even better, a scalpel blade is really good for cutting these things off. You can also even use a damp cloth or a damp paintbrush and wash the glue off while it's still wet. And some modelers and some furniture builders, I do that on the side as well, don't like the damp cloth method because they say that it'll water down the glue and it ruins the joint. Honestly, I've not found that to be true, but to each their own, right? At any rate, when you're working with this, what will end up happening is it either leaves a very large, noticeable relief in the side of the building or wherever this glue spot is, or it's going to make a shiny spot. And that's something that you can fix very easily with a little bit of dull coat. Gaps in the corners, again, don't have to call a foundation guy for that because we're just working on something small here. You just need to make sure your pieces fit together very nice and tight, and that it makes a good, tight, complete joint when you're gluing up. Now, here's a picture of something I did probably 20, 25 years ago, and it's not the best piece of work in the world, but we have the Blob. Notice right here next to the storage tank, when I was pushing that tank up against the building, evidently I got the glue onto the siding and didn't notice it. And I had this picture in a slide deck and taught it in clinics for years and turned around one day and noticed that. So it's easy for it to be missed if you're not really looking for it. And it's hard to get away from our models sometimes. And because we spend so much time on them, we get a little target fixated, is what fighter pilots tend to call it. But we get a little tunnel visioned, and these things are our babies, so we don't like them being criticized anyway. But you tend to start looking over things. You start seeing past the problems, and it's good sometimes to take a photograph and step away from it and look at the image and look at what the picture tells you, and really look for what's there and not what you think is there. And it'll help really point some of these things out. But this obviously is going to get a pipe or some lumber stacked up in there, or something's going to have to happen to hide that. Still moving on the same thing, you always want to make sure that your cuts are very good and straight. Now, using a good straight edge will help here. Clamp the board down if you need to. But one of the biggest things I see a lot of modelers have struggles with is they try to cut through the material all in one pass. And you don't want to try to do this. You're overstressing the blade. If you use scalpels like I like to do, those blades won't take a lot of pressure and you'll be breaking them off. And sometimes when you break them off, they end up in places where you don't want them to go. And the next voice in the conversation usually starts somewhere with 911, please state the nature of your emergency. And you don't want to be there. It's something that's easy to fix. All you have to do is make very small, shallow, light passes and just be making several of them. If you're working with wood, you can hear the fibers of the wood cutting, and eventually it'll split across. About the only thing that you can make a single pass on are some thin papers. You start getting a little bit thicker, even that I wouldn't recommend trying to muscle through it all in one shot. Another good example, too, is when you're cutting openings for windows and doors. You've got a square or rectangular opening, and a split in wood is like water or electricity. It will find the easiest path. So if you are cutting the wood along the grain and you're getting a little heavy-handed with the cut and it causes the wood to split, it's going to travel down the wood grain in the easiest direction it can. If you'll start the process off, draw your window opening on the back of the siding, and then take a pin vise and drill a hole in all four corners. This does two things. It gives your blade a place to start and stop, so you don't go past the edge of the window. The other thing is, if it does create a split, you've now created the weakest spot around the area, and most of the time that split will travel toward that hole, and then it will stop instead of running past and possibly ruining the entire piece of siding. The other thing I really want to talk about too is a lot of guys will build, and gals will build their models, and they'll paint it, they'll fully assemble it, and then try to paint it, or they'll fully assemble it and then try to weather it. Do as much as you can while the building and the structure, the rolling stock, whatever it is you're working on, while it's still flat pieces. This will allow you to weight the pieces down and allow it to dry and dry flat. The other thing is, if you're working with wood, whatever you do to one side, do to all sides. So even though you might not put an interior in a building, paint the back side of the wall. This will do two things. It distributes the damp material around the piece of wood all the way around, so it doesn't get a case of where one side is dry and one side is wet, which will only cause it to cup or bow, warp basically. If you get it wet on both sides, it will relieve a lot of that and will allow it to maintain a nice straight edge. The other idea too is, if you're lighting your buildings, or you think you're going to light your buildings, if you don't paint those interior walls, it will cause the wood, because we typically work with very thin woods, it will cause the light to actually seep through the wood grain, and your building walls will now glow, and obviously not an effect we're looking for here. For window glass, microscope slip covers really work great. If you think back to biology class when you were in high school, you had the little piece of glass rectangle slide, you'd put a little drop of whatever on it, and you'd have this little piece of glass that was about a postage stamp in size, and you would drop that on the water and then put it under the microscope. That is a slip cover. They are available. You can buy them online. They come in everything from about a 1-inch square up to about a 3-inch square. They do cut very easily if you get a micromark diamond scribe. However, there is a product available. I buy mine at a art supply store here called Hobby Lobby, but it's called Duralar. It's there on the screen, Duralar. Comes in two different thicknesses. It will cut with scissors. It will cut with a number 11. I really like it because I can cut it on my laser and not melt it. The reflectivity on this is almost as good as glass. Since I discovered this stuff, I haven't used a slip cover since. And it saves you working with glass and having glass slivers around and ending up with them in your fingers. And it's always kind of a mess when you're working with real glass, where this stuff is very nice and easy to work with. The idea here, though, is be sure to follow your photographs, your plans, sketches that you've done, whatever, and be prepared to answer the odd question. If you build something that was, late 1800s, early 1900s, it's out in the middle of nowhere, and it's, the building leans a little bit, or the door's a little crooked or whatever, be prepared to answer that. If someone should ask, and they will, why does your door lean a little bit to the right? Well, this is why. So remember, sound construction principles are always the first step in making a great model. So this next section is the devil's in the details. And it couldn't be more true. It can take a so-so model and it can really make it a fantastic one just by adding the right detail parts. And it really does bring a model to life. So let's start at the top. We tend to look down on our layouts unless you have a double deck or triple deck or whatever, where you have something that's a little more eye level. We tend to spend most of our time looking down onto our layouts. So therefore, we look at the roofs of our buildings and the roofs of our rolling stock far more than we look at the sides and the backs and everything else. So pay more attention to the details on roofs. And there's a stunning amount of things that can go on a building's roof. Now, I'm not saying get away from gas meters and electric meters and window air conditioners and signs and drain pipes. Far from it. They need that too. But the roof detail, what you're seeing the most, is where you can really make it pop. And one of the easiest things to do that most people miss are plumbing vents. Go outside and look up on your roof of your house, and you'll see a pipe that sticks up about 18 inches, maybe 2 feet max. There's no cap on the top of it. There's no dome or anything. It just kind of runs up there and stops. That is the vent for your plumbing. Without it, water will not drain out of your sinks. If there is running water in a building, so if people are living there, people are working there, which is kind of what we tend to build on our railroads, then you should have these. And it's the easiest, cheapest detail you can add. A piece of styrene, drill a little bit of a hole in it, color it black inside, paint the pipe color, and glue 2 or 3 of them onto a building. And it will add a little extra detail. It's exceedingly cheap to do. And it is, again, another one of those things where it will help you set something apart. Now, I do apologize, for the quality of this picture. I really didn't know which end of a camera to point where back when I took this one, but you can see in here through some of the fuzziness, window air conditioners, all this vent work in here, duct work. There's a pipe there. There's a call box for telephones and that sort of thing. There's roof cyclones and all sorts of other little vents and air conditioners and more of it over here. Now, the one odd rule, I said a minute ago 2 or 3, and I kind of messed there. The human brain does a lot of really cool things. Unfortunately, one of the things it does when you're modeling is it tends to find symmetry. And nature as a whole, there isn't any symmetry. If you see symmetry, it is a man-made object. If you see perfect straight lines, there's a really good chance it's man-made. And to that point, the reason I bring up the odd rule, if you have a group of trees and there's 4 of them there, the back of your brain is going to sit there and start to itch a little bit because something just doesn't look right. Yet you take one tree out and you leave just the 3 there, and all of a sudden it looks right. Or you add a 5th one in and it looks right. But you have 4 and it's easy to see that it's 4 and something doesn't quite gel. And this goes with everything. The number of structures in the scene or in this part of a scene, the number of vehicles, the number of people, the number of detail parts. If you've got a loading dock and you've got a bunch of stuff sitting around, until it reaches a point where there's just detail everywhere, George Selio's type detail everywhere, then it becomes overload and your brain's not trying to count it anyway. You're just looking at all the wonderful detail and everything. But when it's only a few things and the back of your mind can count it, it's going to do it whether you realize it or not. And if there's an even number there, it really will cause it to look off. So if you've got a scene that really doesn't quite look right, take a quick count and see if you've got anything in there at an even number. Another biggie, dull coat your people. Figures are not shiny unless you're trying to model a rainy scene. A lot of times, I show pictures to some of my colleagues at work, and they'll say, I'm looking at this picture and said, I'm really impressed. The only reason I knew it was a model is I saw the people and I saw the cars. And there's a couple of things here that can really help you with this. Number one, dull coat your people. We tend to, if you buy them especially, a lot of times they're still just a little shiny, even though they're painted with flat paints. With a vehicle, there's a lot of things in there that can really stand to be touched up. Your wheels, for example, are perfectly round. If you file a little bit of a flat spot on them, it'll give the car a little bit of weight. Even the cars are too clean. We tend to have cars driving down our roads with nobody in them, which is also kind of scary, but they're also cleaner than you would see cars sitting on a car lot. So we got to spend a little more time dirtying up our cars. Freight cars, brake equipment, things like that are wonderful details. I typically don't run a lot of brake detail under a car unless it's something I'm putting in the contest room or I'm going, putting into the AP for judging. Otherwise, it's just something that can fall off, which usually means it'll fall across the rails and cause a derailment right in the middle of an operating session in the worst possible place for it to happen. So it's one of those, pick your poison, know what you want to put and where you want to put it. So. This is a picture from our club layout of a club we just recently sold here a year or so ago. It's an SN3, but you can see here I've got, when I talk about odd numbers, break a scene down into parts. So like this, the loading dock here, 1, 2, 3, but yet here is a partial scene, 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3, one car, one dog, one guy. It really does come into play here quite a bit. I played around with trying to put more people up here and it just never really came about, never really fit well. There's 3 guys inside the building working along. One dog, one cat, technically 2 pets. So maybe I'm a little off there. Lots of signs, 3 signs. Lots of signs inside. Interior detail is something a lot of modelers don't mess with, and it can be a handful to do because we will selectively compress our structures down, but not the parts that go inside. And it can be challenging to try to represent something in a smaller space than it was really meant to be. As before, be sure to study your photographs. Go out, look online. One of the best things that's ever come along for model railroading is the fact that cell phones have a camera on them. You can take pictures of anything that you find that might inspire a model later. Put these things away, file them up in a file folder on your computer, and go back and reference those from time to time when you're working on a project. I'll go through when I'm working on, say, a church, and I'll go online through, I like Yahoo Images a little better than Google because I can copy them off straight from Yahoo without having to go to the site and then go find the image. But use your browser of your choice and go in and save off photographs. So I'll save up a whole file folder full of churches, and I'll play around with different designs and things. But it's always nice to have that reference in there. And again, building a model railroad is a bit of smoke and mirrors. So when you're putting your detail on, a lot of detail in the front, a little bit less detail in the center, and next to no, I don't say next to no, but a little bit of detail in the back. And your brain will think that because there's this much detail up there, that there's that much detail back there as well. And remember, it's the little things, that's that little bit of attention, that little attention to detail that really makes a model great. Now, real men never ask for directions. We've always heard this. Our wives are probably sitting there, if they're listening in right now, nodding their heads, going, yep, I never can get them to follow instructions. If they want to build a good model, they do. And that's not saying that you've got to pull the kit out, you've got to pull the instructions out and go through them. As someone who designs laser kits, I can tell you instructions are the most difficult thing to do. It's the hardest part for me. I can design the building over the course of a few days. It'll take me ages to put the details for the instructions together because you don't know how far down and to go and where to stop. But familiarize yourself with the instructions. Go over your photographs, go over the drawings, go over the plans, and really think about the engineering steps you're going to have to go to put these various sub-assemblies together to create whatever it is you're working on. It's real construction practices. There are some really nice looking kits that if you were to build them that way in real life wouldn't even stand up. I've seen some really, really high dollar kits where there'll be like a 10 by 10 or a 12 by 12 complete room hanging off the side of a building with absolutely no structural support underneath it. Now, it's easy to get it to do it on our model. It's just a little bit of glue and that's fine. But if you built that for real, there'd have to be something underneath it. Support posts, like you'd put up for a deck or some cantilevers or something. So be sure to look through your stuff because sometimes taking that extra step of putting some cross bracing underneath it and a couple of posts can add a little bit of extra detail, and it will also be prototypically correct. And again, this is where that research piece comes into it. I freelance a lot of my buildings, so I spend a lot of time studying the prototype, trying to figure out how I can make the model look like the real thing. Now, for me, and this is only for me, I do not mean to insult anybody on here, nail holes are a real pet peeve of mine. If the wall hasn't seen paint in years, I mean, like the paint is almost gone, that nail hole is what it's supposed to represent is the paint has popped off the head of the nail and it started to oxidize. And over the course of time, rain will grab that oxidation and cause a streak down the side of the wall. Again, if you're talking about an old barn that hasn't seen paint in decades, will you see these? Sure. But when you use a pounce wheel, your nails are perfectly lined up, and having built houses as a younger man, we don't bother lining up nails with a straight edge. They go in where they go in. And if you're trying to hit a 2x, that means they go in about 1.5 inches wide pattern there. And yeah, in a model, you're not going to tell the variance on 1.5 inches wide 2x4. And I get that, but it's still a little too uniform. And that's that symmetry I was talking about earlier. And besides the fact, the biggest problem is by the time you hit that thing, now a 16-penny nail is something you'd use for framing. Siding is put on with a much smaller nail. And by the time you scale out a hole made by a pounce wheel, that nail head is about the size of a dinner plate. So what I would recommend if you really want to do the nail head thing is use a very, very sharp colored pencil. And you can still use a straight edge if you want to, but go in there with a nice little colored pencil, and you can use a rusty color one, you can use a black one. But if the wall has fresh paint on it or relatively good paint, you're not going to see that nail head. It is impossible. Thing to keep in mind, guys, if you're in HO scale, remember it this way. If you can't see it from 87.5 feet away or 87 feet away, you're not going to see it from a foot away on your model. So bear that in mind. It will help. Does it help add some extra detail to a structure? Sure, but it's unrealistic detail, and that can cause problems later on. Strictly my 2 cents, and everybody's going to agree with it, and that's fine. The whole thing with modeling is we do what we want to do. We do what we do to make ourselves happy and don't have to please anybody else. But I wanted to throw that one out there. Remember, careful planning is where a good project begins. Now, paint by numbers or the photo finish. So once you've gathered all your pictures and your plans and you're carefully going through and you're building your model, it's time to paint. And as we've talked about before, this should be done before and during a lot of the construction. Again, build most of it while it's in the flat, right? So this is mostly prevalent with wooden models. Again, you've got some leeway with styrene that you don't have to worry about the warping issues. Airbrushing color instead of brush painting. If you have the opportunity to use an airbrush and you're good and comfortable with it, a lot of times that will give you a better finish if you're looking for something very uniform. If you're looking for something beat up, a little streaky, a little weathered, go with a paintbrush and dry brush it on. Try not to put more paint on the model than you have to. And that's something I've seen guys have struggled with. I did some hands-on clinics here not too long ago, and we made a little speeder shed, and I watched a guy take his paintbrush, dip it all the way down till the bristles touch the bottom of the bottle, lift it up out of the paint, let it stop dripping, and then starts troweling paint on the side of this wall. And I'm looking at that going, you do realize that you just put enough paint on there to paint the entire structure at least twice. So there's some things here that, you got to be careful about. And again, when working with wood, less is more in this case. So almost dry brush it on. It'll help, fight the warping. Now, there's many different ways to weather them, and we're not going to cover a lot of that because that's a completely different set of clinics. But pastel chalks have always been a standby, but there's always tricky because you have to overdo it. And then when you seal it, a lot of that melts away. Now, if you've not worked with them yet, Bragdon powders, AIM, some of the other newer powders have a bit of an adhesive property, and they don't do that the same way. So if you've not played with those yet, definitely, get you a piece of wood, paint it, or a piece of styrene and paint that and practice before you start trying to apply it onto another model. Same goes with an airbrush. I mean, mix up your paint, shoot it on a piece of scrap board, paper, whatever, foam core board, whatever you've got, handy, and see what your pattern looks like. See what the spray lays down looking like. See if you're getting the effect you want. Do I have too much paint? Not enough paint? All these things are are correctable until they hit the model. And then a lot of times, especially if it's too much, you can't take it off. So there's a lot of things out here, a lot of different media that you can try. Pan pastels have come along and have really become popular in the last few years, and I really do like those for covering a lot of ground quickly. For fine detail, I like a lot of colored pencils. Prismacolor colored pencils work really nice. AK Interactive is a company that makes things for tank modelers, military modelers, and they have a set of weathering pencils that are watercolors. And these are really, really nice. I got a set of them a couple of months ago now, and I've had a chance to play with them some, and I'm really, really enjoying those as well. So always be looking ahead, learn new techniques, new media to work with. YouTube is a wonderful resource for this. Clinics like these are great resources. I'm sure we're going to have several different, painting and weathering clinics coming up as Gateway X continues, and these will be wonderful opportunities to learn how to use something new. Now, one of the things that should be used on everything, if it's between the fascia and the backdrop, is a little bit of a dark stain. And typically, most of us, that's alcohol and India ink. And you can mix this up in various different strengths and different shades. But when I say everything, I mean people, scenery, cars, structures, rolling stock, all of it. It sinks into all the little nooks and crannies, and it creates shadows. It creates the depth, and it will help your stuff become more three-dimensional. And you don't have to do it, all the same strength. Make one a little lighter, one a little darker, or whatever. Now, one thing I will caution on, a lot of guys, and I'm one of them, have fallen into the trap of, I have some black shoe dye. I'll use that instead of the India ink. Most black shoe dyes are very, very, very dark blue. and it will cause some very interesting bluish purpley colored stains under fluorescent lights. And since a lot of us use fluorescent lights in our train room, I wanted to pass that one along because it will ruin a good model and it will do it quickly. And I can attest to that one. For paints, you can use almost anything. True Color Testers is still out there for a while yet. Vallejo makes some really nice paints. AK Interactive has their line, Star brand. It goes on and on and on. A lot of modelers have been kind of shying away from craft paints here recently, but as long as you don't have a lot of UV coming into your train room, which will fade out your layout anyway, you probably can get away with a lot of the craft paints. Hobby Lobby has a 40% off coupon you can get on your phone. I think Michael's Art Supplies has something very similar. Online, they'll have different sales, but a lot of the art supply stores on what I kind of refer to as the mom-friendly holidays, things like Easter and Mother's Day and stuff like that, they'll tend to put those craft paints on sale, and sometimes you can even get them 2 for $1, things like that. So, and the reason I bring these out is they come in a world of different colors, and it can save you some time trying to match something that you mixed up previously. If you're looking for a certain shade of blue, it's a lot easier to reach into a paint rack and grab the bottle than it is to go, okay, that was 6 drops of this color and 2 drops of this and 5 drops of white, and try to remix the whole thing, especially if it's years down the road and you're trying to correct something that's chipped off or whatever. Now, one of the first things in weathering that a lot of folks will miss in the rolling stocks, I'll try to get it looking nice and dirty, but one of the chief things that a lot of us miss is fading the lettering. We'll grab a boxcar, we'll pull it out of the box, it's already ready to go, so we'll grab our backs of magic tricks here, and we'll start weathering it up. And when we're done, you have this car that looks like it's been out on the line for 10, 12, 15, 20, 30 years, but the lettering underneath looks brand new. That lettering fades and it gets worn just like the rest of the car does. The next time you're stuck at a railroad crossing watching the cars go by, pay attention to the lettering as it goes and get an idea of what I'm talking about. And it's one of the easiest things you can do as you start your weathering process. Mix up a wash, almost impossibly thin wash of the same color or as close as the same color as the background of the car itself, and then mix that up in your airbrush, or you can flood it on with a paintbrush if you get it really, really thin, and shoot a coat of that around all of the white lettering on a car or the black lettering or whatever color your lettering may be, and it will fade that into the background instantaneously, and right there alone will age your car very, very quickly. And then you can start putting in the grease and the grime and the dust and the rust and the mud and things like that. Talked a little bit about the Prismacolor colored pencils. Those are really, really nice because they come in all sorts of different colors. You get them very, very sharp, fine points on them, and you can get down in the nooks and crannies between boards. You can highlight the edges of clapboard to represent a little sunshine, things like that. They are really, really a handy little trip. Now, again, following the plans, studying the prototype. I've mentioned this before. I cannot stress this enough. But when you're looking at lettering on your models, where to place them, things like that, nothing is more invaluable than a good set of plans, drawings, or pictures. And one of the things we talk about are roof walks, or I haven't talked about yet is roof walks. Roof walks on most railroads. Now, I'm going to say all because there's always the exception to the rule. But in a lot of times, what we've found over the years is trainmen, as they walk across the roofs of the cars, and especially back in steam era when you had brakemen walking across the car tops all the time, is a painted surface is slick when it gets damp. An unpainted surface will weather and it will crack a little bit, and it gives a little bit of grip to the feet. So what a lot of times they would do if they repainted a car, they would paint the sides of the roof walk, but not the walking surface itself. So this is something that you might want to think about depending on your railroad. Again, go out and see if you can find some pictures. And I know a lot of times we're talking about steam era. Almost all of the pictures are in black and white, so it's really, really hard to tell. But you look at the surface, the wood grain surface of the wood. If it looks like it's got a lot of big cracks in it, a lot of dark stripes running along the length of the board, chances are it wasn't painted, and that's a crack that you're seeing. So things like this are really, really handy. Cinders up on your roof, up around the ribs of the roof, around the roof walks are a very nice touch. And it's a little bit of graphite. It's a little bit of, Vallejo matte varnish, paint a little bit of a spot in there, put a little bit into it, and let that act as an adhesive as well as a flattening agent. And it will give you a little bit of roof detail for your car. Stripes and numbers are something you got to be really careful about, especially your car numbers. If you're into operations, you don't want to over-weather those. If you do the same thing a railroad does. Mask you off a little rectangle, paint you some solid color over it, put you a new set of numbers on it, and it will help tell a story. It's all about context. And if you've seen any of my other clinics, you hear me talk about context a lot. Why is it dirty there? Or would it be dirty there? And if it is dirty there, how would it get dirty there? And that can help you think about how to go about applying it. So for an example, on a wooden front porch, if you have a screen door, they open outwards. A lot of times they'll drag on the porch a little bit. And, the first time you open it, you kind of, okay, it's stuck. You lift on it and you open it up. But over time, that will create a drag mark on that front porch. And that is a really nice little detail to, scrape into a porch on your buildings. It's ingrains of your decks. They suck up the moisture first, so they rot faster. The edges of the boards or the ends will always go faster than the centers, so they need to be a little bit darker. That also helps you to establish a traffic pattern. Where are all the people walking? Because they'll push that moisture away, and it won't be allowed to sit on it, soak in, and cause it to weather. It'll push it out to the outer edges, which again sucks it up and causes it to rot a little faster. The bottoms of your walls stay wetter longer because of this. So the bottoms of your walls will show more weathering effects than the tops of your walls. Another big mistake that a lot of modelers make is they'll weather that wall all the way to the top, right up into the eave. But yet that eave is overhanging the wall by a foot or two, and it's protecting it from the sun. It's protecting it from all the rain and the stuff that tends to damage our walls. I've got photographs staved off of barns and things where about a foot and a half, maybe down the wall, the paint looks like it was put on yesterday. But below that, there's no paint left on it because it hasn't seen a brush in decades. So keep this in mind. Unless it's, track side on a steam engine where that smoke's going to curl up underneath that edge all the time, chances are it's not going to be dirty up underneath there like it is everywhere else. So this is a model I did, and everything on this was done with Bragdon colored pencil, or with a little bit of Bragdon powders and Prismacolor colored pencils, except the rust here on the inside. And that is a product actually called from Sophisticated Finishes that is actually designed to put patina on picture frames. And they sell this as a rusting medium. They also have a copper one. If you're doing a copper roof, you can get that really nice green patina because it actually is the real thing. In this particular case, it's iron filings in a solution of paint. And you hit this with an oxidizer. So remember our motto when it comes to weathering: if it ain't dirty, it ain't done. All right, so we're getting down to the end of this here. So you got an itch you can't scratch? Well, that's because, a lot of times when we're making something, especially on the narrow gauge side of things, there aren't models available. Until recently, there wasn't a lot of ready-to-run stuff available. God bless Blackstone and PBL. They keep all of us in ready-to-run models. But a lot of times, if you want a structure, you're going to have to build it yourself from scratch, or you're going to have to kit bash a kit. And those are always nice things to do because it gives you something that not everybody else has. If you can put 4 walls together in a Campbell kit, you can scratch build. The only difference between scratch building and a Campbell kit is they bought the wood and stuck it in a box for you instead of you going to the hobby shop and buying it yourself. If you can follow the plans, buy the wood, buy the strip wood, you can build that. If you can build a Campbell kit, you can build from scratch, no problem. It's the same principles. Now, we've got a lot of things going on here in North Texas. I'm part of a narrow gauge club. We're working on S and SN3, and I've got a mine that I built for a friend of mine that I'll show you here in a bit. This is actually an S-scale layout from a friend of mine who passed away here a couple of years ago. It was a car shop that he had me design for him, and he wanted some machinery. And I could not find woodworking machinery in S-scale at all. So I actually ended up building a few things out of styrene to help meet the need. Now, we model a freelance narrow gauge. So there's a lot of things that are left up to our imagination instead of being held down to, if this mine was here and that building was there. I've got a little bit of leeway to move that around, but that doesn't mean that I just do whatever I want to do wherever I want to do it. We're a proto freelance. So, when Dad and I are working on our respective layouts, we're going for something that leans toward the Rio Grande Southern or the Denver and Rio Grande Westerns narrow gauge stuff through Colorado. And to me, this somewhat helps ground me a bit to help me with that research piece I was talking about, but it also gives you a little bit of inspiration. So when I'm looking through things, because I do like to scratch build, and that's part of the reason why I gravitated to the narrow gauge side, even when I have a kit, if I'm presented with the choice, do I build the kit or do I build it from scratch? I almost always scratch build it just because A, it's a little bit cheaper and I can get it exactly the way I want it. The kit may not be the era that you're looking for. It may be the building from the 30s, and you need the building from when it was in the 50s, and there was an extra door, or the door had moved, or there's windows there, or there's windows missing. And a lot of laser kits don't allow for it. A lot of laser kits are slot and tab construction, and inevitably you're going to have a hole where you don't need it, and it's hard to hide that. So kit bash as much as you can. Give yourself something that only you have, and it will help your stuff stand out. A good example of this, my dad really liked the Silver Vista observation car that ran on the DNR GW, and they've recreated that now in Durango. In fact, they have 2 versions of it. Haven't seen a model of it other than in brass, and it's very difficult to find, and Dad sat down and built this one out of styrene with microscope slipcover glass in every one of those windows in the top. It was a lot of painstaking work, but it can be done. Little scratch-built boxcar. Again, study your pictures, figure out what kind of materials are available. If it's a wooden car or a wooden building, use wood. If it's metal, go for styrene or go for brass if you really want to try something different. Figure out what parts you're going to have to modify, what you're going to have to modify in the kit if you're going to kit bash it, what can be purchased as far as detail parts, if you need a gas meter, what's available, that kind of thing. So always remember, it's like eating dinner. Which is better, going out to eat or a nice, good, made from scratch meal at home? The nice part is the scratch food is better for you, and the cook's hands were clean when they started. Now, through all of this, I've poked a lot of fun and I've thrown a lot of really bad puns out there, but these are the 5 areas that will make or break a good model. And if you learn to look at a project with these 5 things in mind, you'll come up with a model that is really sure to please. And now that you've done all this hard work, there's one more thing to keep in mind. These are the same 5 areas that a model is judged in for the achievement program. These are the things that MMRs have learned in building their models, and it's why they're MMRs today. Working with these areas in mind will make you a better modeler, and that's what the achievement program is all about. I get it, it's not for everybody. Judging can be done in the comfort of your own home. It doesn't have to be done as part of a contest. It doesn't have to be done in front of a whole group of people if you're nervous about having your work looked at. I know some people really even get kind of wrapped around the axle a little bit about the term judging. If it makes you feel more comfortable, think of it as an evaluation. The idea is that it should be educational. If you're losing points, you should know why. Here in the LSR, one of the things that I put in when I was over the contest room was I want my judges to flip the sheet over and write on the back of it why they lost points. So the modeler goes home going, okay, I got 105, so I lost 20 points. Where? And something that really want you to keep in mind in all of this too. 87.5 points out of 125 is 70%. So if it's a C- or better, it should merit. I'll say should. It depends on where you lose your points, but it should merit. Keep in mind all of those 5 areas. And if you've got questions, reach out to me. Your regional national AP people can help you, your divisional AP people. If you've got questions, you don't know who that is, please feel free to email me. I will find out who that is for you, and I will get you in contact with them. I'll answer as many questions as I can along that. I cannot encourage each and every one of you to get involved in the achievement program. It will make you a better modeler. I do guarantee it. I've had people go, I don't really think it will, but fine, I'll get into it. And every one of them, after they've hit the end goal, and I've called them up and congratulated them to the person, every one of them has come back and said, you know what, Duane, you were right. I'm a much better modeler now than I was when I started all of this. If you've got any questions, again, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm just about out of time. Speed, do you want to cut over and do some questions and answers, or do you want me to talk about write-ups real quick?
You have 2 more minutes.
Okay, well, I'm going to touch on write-ups. On the LSR, LoneStarRegion.com, in the contest section, down in the entry forms and all of that, there's a link that says, read this first. It is a 1-page handout on how to do a write-up. So when you're writing up your model for evaluation or for a contest or for the AP, these are things that were taken out of the judges' guidelines. When in doubt, write it down. Don't assume the judges will know. List things. I mean, a lot of guys, some don't care about the hours of labor. I do. How it was constructed is very important. Any fabricating, any kit bashing, altered parts of purchased or kit parts, masters that you made for castings, bring the molds, any photo etch parts that you made. If you've got loads, how are they attached? That sort of thing. they bolted, nailed, wedged, chained, banded, braced, whatever, write that kind of stuff down. Write down how it was hard for you to do it, because complexity of how hard or how difficult something was to do. Something that you find incredibly hard to do because maybe you have cataracts, so you don't see that well, I may find very easy to do, and I may not give you the credit due because you had a very hard time doing something that I normally wouldn't, and vice versa. So if it's something that you found difficult, jot it down. But in construction, you can see here some of the things to talk about. Under detail, list all the parts that were involved. How hard was it to put some of these parts in? We're not really looking for the quality of the detail, it's the quantity. So board by board construction, list that here. To me, that's a detail. Bolt heads, nail heads, doorknobs, things like that, all these things go in here. Again, don't assume the judges will know. Under conformity, give us pictures, give us plans, a sketch with crayons on a bar napkin, just something so that we can look at what did you set out to do and how well did you achieve it? How accurate is your lettering? How, did you use selective compression? That sort of thing. All the research that was involved, all those pictures and plans I was talking about before. Again, write it down. Finish the lettering. If it's multicolored, it's a little harder to do. If there's stripes in it, it's certainly harder to do. So here we're looking for quality. We're looking at decals. We're looking, did you make your own decals? Excess decal film. If you bevel the edge just slightly on your decals, put it down, hit it with a little dull coat, your eye won't follow across and see that very jagged 90-degree corner on some really thick older decal films. A little bit of a bevel on that will help it ride right over the top of it. You'll never know it's there. Anything that's homemade, anything that does have the correct fonts, again, dull coat to hide the shine. In scratch building, everything that you scratch built and how, list it out. List the quantity of the parts, because over a certain percentage of a model is scratch built, the whole thing is considered scratch built. Also, don't forget what parts are exempt. If you're building a freight car, all the brake rigging, the trucks, the couplers, they don't expect you to make those from scratch. But if you do, bonus on you, and it will help you beef out those part numbers and help your detail count as well. Describe the percentage, give an idea of how much was done. Again, if in doubt, write it down. And I'll open it up to any questions.
Okay, let's start with the AP stuff first.
Okay.
How important is a diorama base for a structure entered in a contest?
Well, it depends on what category you're wanting to go for. If you want to go into dioramas, then a scenic base is everything. If you don't have much scenery and a lot of detail around a structure, it is not going to perform well in a diorama category. And typically, from the contests I've been involved in over the years, that's the most difficult category of the bunch. If you're talking about just a structure, the scenery around it makes absolutely no difference. It's not judged as part of the structure. In fact, in the LSR, if you're in the contest room, we have a regional rule here that if there's any scenery past the drip edge of the building, it has to go to dioramas.
Okay, watercolor pencils. Have you used them? Tips for using them? Blending with a damp brush or something?
Yes, the AK Interactive pencils I mentioned earlier are really nice. They're watercolor. I've blended them with a wet makeup sponge. My daughter is into theater, and she's gotten into stage effect makeup and things. And whenever she starts wearing out makeup sponges and stuff, because they'll develop a bit of a rip in them like this one has, instead of throwing them away, I have her wash them out and I get them. Damp paint brushes, paper towels, a wet finger can do a lot to help blend them around. The AK Interactives as well, if you have one of these little white erasers or like one of the ones that, these little clicky erasers that we get from the office supplies, you can actually erase them off as well. And this will also work a little bit of blending. Just about anything, if you get it damp, it'll move around pretty well. I like them a lot.
Someone says Bragdon powder stick well. Do they fade away under matte lacquer or top coat?
No. The Bragdon powders and the Ames both stick very, very well. In fact, a lot of times probably more than we might want them to. The old pastels, the harder you would rub them, the more they would blend and kind of disappear. These, the harder you rub them, the better they stay. And I can tell you, if you get a little bit of dust on your shirt, Windex will get it out as long as you get to it fast enough. Otherwise, if you wash it, it's there for the duration. You'll have a nice shirt with a very nice rusty demarcation line from about where your belly up to your modeling table up. But the Bragdon powders, no. A little bit goes a long way, so try to go really, really light, work your way up to an effect you like, and then seal it.
Then early on, someone asked, "Are you a fan of cork backing on straight edge, on the straight edge?"
Yes, because it'll keep your ruler from slipping around. I've got one on this one, as a matter of fact. So yeah, I like it because it'll help hold it in place. If you're worried about it, and I got a friend of mine who's got a pretty wicked hand trimmer. Something I recommended to him here not too long ago: clamp the thing down. The quick grit clamps make a kind of a little. They're not an F style clamp, but it's just you can buy them in different sizes, and you can actually take it and clamp it to your workbench and let that help hold it still while you make a cut if you need to. But yes, cork the back of your rulers.
And then earlier you talked about clamps. Have you used the Bachmann magnet clamps?
I haven't. I haven't, and I've thought about getting a couple of those to give those a try. Just I'm a fan of, because I teach a lot of these things, so I want to try everything out if I can. I haven't had a chance to give them a try yet, but I tell you from the pictures, those do look really interesting. The ones I saw too that Walther sells that you can open them up to help clamp a roof down are really nice. I tend to use bean bags from playing the little cornhole game at a campground or whatever. Buy a set of those at a sporting goods store and split them with your buddies, because a couple of those things, they're a real hefty weighted bag. You can set your roof down in the building and put a little bit of glue on it, and then set that bag on top of it, and it'll help weight it down, and it conforms to whatever the pitch of your roof is.
Okay, now back to the judging and AP stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Cardstock structures or cardstock structure models be considered for judging?
Certainly, any model can be judged. I've heard people complain that I built a insert kit manufacturer here, and this can't be judged. It can. You can have any model you build judged. It's all about how well did you do. If you buy a very high dollar Craftsman kit, it's going to be harder for you to get it to merit, because so much of the engineering and the construction was made simple for you by the design of the kit. So that's when you get into that whole don't build it like it looks on the box, so you can help make it more difficult, things to that effect. But yes, you can make a building out of any material you want, and you can get it judged.
Okay, big question. Where does 3D printing fall in the contest?
3D printing is just 3D printers are just another tool. Same with lasers. And I kind of blazed the trail on that one about 12, 13 years ago. It's no different than having a chopper or a micromark table saw. It is just another tool. The trick with 3D printing or with a laser is you have to do the drawings yourself. You can take, as long as you do the drawing, you prototype it on whatever little printer you have, and then you send it up to Shapeways to have the final version printed. It is still a scratch-built part as long as they don't have to manipulate your drawings at all. If you do the drawing, it's a scratch-built part, and it's perfectly acceptable. 3D printing is most definitely the direction this hobby's moving in.
Yes. Okay. John built a diorama of scenery. How would he know in which category to enter it?
Yeah, anytime you've got scenery in it, it's almost always going to end up being a diorama. Check with your local contest guys if you're going for a contest entry. If you're talking about the AP, all we're going to look at is the structure itself or the rolling stock that's on the, or whatever it is we're there to judge. The scenery will be ignored.
Cool. Last question. Do you know where to buy the thin cork that goes in the back of the straight edge?
I'm trying to think. The place I bought my last set of that is no longer in business. I was picking it up locally at a building supply. Yeah, you have to hop online and Google search it and see what you come up with. To be honest with you, I don't have a good answer. I'm sorry. Not something very thick, though.
Yes. I was going to suggest my N-scale cork that I buy at Hobby Lobby, but that's too thick for a straight edge.
Yeah, something you might even consider too. They make a material that's used for lining our kitchen drawers. A lot of guys will use it in their toolboxes as well, and you can buy that in a great big roll at Walmart or different places and cut it into smaller pieces. It's great for opening jar lids and stuff. It also is really nice to help keep your ruler from sliding around, but it is really thick, so it makes it very difficult to kind of get everything lined up for sure.
And that, Duane, brings us to the end of the night.
Excellent. Have a good evening, everyone.